Hi, I'm Ron with Amazing Mile Marker Stops, and today I'm going to show you how to build this door for your galley cabinet. We're going to build a cabinet door for one of our upper cabinets. I'm going to show you how to build a cabinet door. This will work whether it's an upper, a lower, it doesn't matter. There's different types of doors you can build, and I'm not going to show you all the types. The one we're building today is a panel door. So you're going to use a trim around the edge and then a panel in the middle. And so we're going to start, again, it's a lot of what you do is just personal preference. I'm using a 1x2, so I have a 1.5 inch wide trim, but you could use a 1x3, have a wider trim. It's entirely up to you. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you get some nice straight board, because yeah, your door will look kind of funny if your board's crooked. So make sure it's nice and straight. And this particular wood, this is red oak, it's what we've been using to build these cabinets, and it's sold by the foot. So people come in and they take a handsaw, you know, Home Depot is where I bought this, you can buy it at Lowe's. They take a handsaw and they cut a piece off. You don't know how straight the cut was. So the first thing you want to do before you do any measuring is cut the very end off just a little bit, not a lot, but just enough to make sure that that is a straight edge. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do. Now that we have a straight edge, we're going to take our measurement. Our measurement is 23 inches. And the way we arrive at that is you take your opening on your cabinet and vertically, I'm doing the two sides right now. So you take your vertical opening in the cabinet and add, again, it's your call, but in this case, because it's an upper and there's nothing else around it, I'm adding a 1/2 inch to the bottom and a 1/2 inch to the top for overlap. We're going to use Euro hinges, and so you want to overlap. Now, if you're using traditional hinges, you may not want an overlap, at least on the side where the hinges are at. So all depends on your hinges, but I think the Euro hinges look a lot nicer. That's what you see in any quality home today. They're completely hidden, you don't see them at all. They also allow your door to swing without binding because it's not swinging into the cabinet. The hinge swings it out from the cabinet. So you take your opening, you add at least a 1/4 inch for overlap, but I like 1/2 inch. Now I will tell you that if I was building a cabinet door where there's a drawer above it or below it, then I would only do a 1/4 inch, because you're going to have overlap on the drawer and you don't want to eat up all your trim with your overlaps, unless that's the style you're going for, in which case go for it. But I want at least 1 inch of trim showing at all times in my cabinet. So if I had a drawer below it, I'd put a 1/4 inch overlap on the drawer and then a 1/4 inch overlap on the cabinet door, and that would give me a 1 inch strip of trim still showing, and that's what I'm going for. But since there is no drawer above and below, because this is an upper, I put a 1/2 inch overlap on the door, and that gives me my 1 inch trim that will show to match the 1 inch trims in my base unit. All right, now we're going to cut the top and the bottom piece. And the way you want to calculate that is you figure you look at your opening, add a 1/2 inch on either side, because that's what I'm doing, is 1/2 inch overlap. And then you have to subtract 3 inches. The reason you subtract 3 inches is because, remember, you just cut your two sides, and they are 3 inches across, okay? The top and the bottom are going to go inside, not above. They're going to go inside. So you've got to subtract that thickness from your total distance. And why do they go inside, you may ask? I'm glad you asked. If you put them on top, then as somebody's looking at your cabinet, they see the end here. And the end is never as pretty as the side running with the grain. A cross cut showing the grain is just, it soaks up your stain or your paint. It's rougher. Even when you sand it, you can't get it as smooth as you can the edge that runs with the grain. So you want to hide that end inside the finished edge of your vertical pieces. So that's why I always put the ends to where they don't show them, where they don't show the people looking at them. I realize that you can see the end on the vertical piece, but it's facing the ceiling, so you got to be on the ceiling to see it, or laying on the cabinet, laying on the countertop of the cabinets below to see the bottom of it. So that's why you want to do that. All right, now you have all 4 pieces for your trim. So now we're gonna move on to the next step. To insert the panel, what you want to do is route out a groove. In this case, I'm using, it's actually 3/16 inch paneling. They call it 1/4 inch, but it's not. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch router bit, and I want to go 1/4 inch up in so that you have enough room for the panel to go in, but you don't sacrifice or endanger the integrity of this board. So just a 1/4 inch in, and I'm centering it. You don't have to. Again, it's just what you find pleasing. You can offset this groove and have less board in front or more board in front, whatever you want, but I'm doing right down the center is what I'm shooting for. So on the short piece here, which will be the bottom and the top of the cabinet door, you can cut all the way through. Okay, so we're gonna do those first. Another thing you want to do, especially if you're intentionally offsetting your cut, but even though I'm trying to get it in the center, it's not accurate. Even a minute change in distance between actually being centered and being a little off will mess you up if you're flipping your boards back and forth. Now you don't have your cuts perfectly lined up. So what I do is I write on the back of them where this piece goes. So this is my right hand door up on the top, and then I have an arrow showing which way I want the top to be. So you write all that on the back so you know how this is oriented when you're taking it back and forth from your workplace. And then each piece, I will put this writing against my backboard, and that way I know if there's any offset in the cut, it's going to be the same on each board and they'll end up lining up. Now, another good trick is as you're trying to route this, the router blade tries to kick this board around. So what you can do is take a board like this and clamp it down, and that way as you pass the board through, it holds it in place and doesn't allow it to be kicked around. Now when you cut the sides, which are the long piece, you don't want to end up seeing this cut at the top and the bottom. So what you have to do is stop your router cut before it gets to the end. And since I'm using an 1.5 inch wide board, I just got to do that at least anywhere from 1.25 inches to 1 inch before the end. I've got to have 1/4 inch for my paneling to go up into, which leaves me 1.25 inches. So anywhere between 1 inch and 1.25 inches I can pull out. So the way you do that, and you want that at both ends, that way you don't see the cut. The way you do that is I've drawn lines on this board here, which is 1 inch off center this side and 1 inch off center this side. So if I line the edge of my board up with this leading 1 inch, and then I drop my board down, that'll start cutting 1 inch into the board and leave that solid at the end. Then when I get to the other side, I stop at the line that's 1 inch, again 1 inch offset. So if I stop at that line and then I just rocker my board out, then that stops it from cutting all the way in. Now the next thing you want to decide in making your cabinet door is, do you want any other decorations on it? For just a traditional shaker panel door, you're done. You're ready to assemble things. And you can see one right here. This is what it would look like if you do nothing further. But we want to put a design on ours, make it look a little fancier than just the traditional shaker door. So to do that, you need your router again. We're going with a simple design, but it still gives a little bit of extra touch to it. And that's this design right here. So we've got it all set up, and we're gonna, as always, run a test piece through. That's just a little piece of junk that we ran to make sure it looks the way we want it to look. And now we're gonna cut the actual piece. And there we go, a nice clean cut, but just gives it a little bit extra design. Now on your long side pieces, you also need to cut the top and the bottom the same way. They'll line up with the cut you put on the top piece and the bottom piece, but you've got to cut that little bit of edge. The best way to do that, because otherwise once your board gets into the middle here, it's just going to slip right on in there, and you don't want that. So the best way to do that is to take another board, put it up against here, put this one next to it, and hold your actual trim piece to that board. And then when you get out here, this board will still be against your guide board. And just like that, it gives you a nice, good cut to round your corner out. All right, the next thing you want to do is cut your panel, and you're going to measure the inside distance and add 1/4 of an inch on either side, so 1/2 inch total, as well as 1/2 inch for the top and bottom. Check and make sure that your grain goes the same way for each panel. You don't want it one way for one, another for another. It'd look really weird. So we have all our grain on all the cabinets. The grain's been going sideways, so we're going to keep doing that. Now before you start assembling these and gluing them together and doing things that are permanent, I recommend you put each one of them together and make sure all the pieces fit. So that's what we've done here. We have 3 panel doors and they all fit. So we're good to go to the next step. Next, you want to put pocket holes in these to hold the pieces together. I recommend a Craig jig. I think there's others out there, but Craig is probably the leader. And the only thing you have to put pocket holes in is the top piece and the bottom piece. You do not put any pocket holes in the side pieces. All right, so you just put the piece vertically in your Craig jig. They have marks here that you line it up with. You take your special Craig drill bit, make sure it's set for 3/4 of an inch, this set for 3/4 of an inch, because that's what we're using, and drill your hole. Then you flip it over and do the other side. And there you have it. All right, once you have your pocket holes drilled, the next thing to do is to start assembling it. The first thing you want to assemble is one of the long sides and the top and the bottom. You need to do that to be able to slide the panel in. All right, you just want to put a little glue on the end, not too much. It's going to compress out and spread it out. You don't want it all oozing over the side, so just a little bit. About like that. Then you're going to put these two ends together and you're going to clamp it down. Good. Next, you want to slide your panel in. Lastly, you want to put your glue on these two ends and put your last piece together. And there you have your finished panel. Once you have your door completely assembled, the next step would be to wood putty it. Now, if you're going to paint your door, you can use any color wood putty, doesn't matter. If you're going to stain it like I'm going to, you want to get some wood putty to closely match it. In my case, I'm using red oak wood, and I actually found red oak wood putty. How good can you get? So you just take some of this wood putty, and then you're just going to spread it across the cracks. You're going to get way too much on there, don't worry about it, you're going to sand that off. So just work it in there, rub off any excess, and we'll sand that off later after it dries. You also want to make sure that you get the tops. Anywhere there's that crack, you want to seal that crack in to try to make it disappear. That's the whole goal, is to make that crack disappear. Make sure you push it in that crack really good. If it's just on the surface, when you sand, you'll just sand away all your work. If you're using the hidden Euro style hinges, then you're going to need to drill a hole in your cabinet door for that hinge to recess into. The easiest way to do that is to get a little jig. Not much to them, but they'll save you a lot of time. And you get this at any place that sells hinges, like Home Depot, Lowe's, etc. And you're just going to put that against the frame of your cabinet door, and just figure out where you want to put it downward and upward. You're going to put the same distance. So we chose 2 inches to the edge of our jig, and then once you have that in place, you're going to just take a pencil, and there's 3 holes, and you just make a mark in each of those 3 holes. And what that is 1 hole is for the big circle that you're going to cut out for the hinge itself, and the other 2 holes are for the screw holes. All right, and then just once we decide we want to do it 2 inches, then you also do 2 inches up from the bottom and do the same thing. Okay, so once you have that measured, the next step is to cut the hole. Now, to do that, the best thing to have is a drill press. You can do this with a hand drill, but it is not easy to get a nice straight cut with a hand drill. So I highly recommend a drill press. It doesn't have to be the biggest one or the most expensive one, but if you don't have access to one for this project, definitely go buy yourself at least an inexpensive drill press. Then you're going to get a Forstner bit, and in fact, that little jig that I showed you, this little jig here, came in a kit with a Forstner bit that's the right size for these hinges. And what a Forstner bit is a drill bit that cuts a flat bottom. Now, you do have a little tip here for a guide that keeps you from slipping all over the place. But other than that, the entire bottom will be flat, unlike a normal drill bit that's kind of cone-shaped on the top and always gives you a cone-shaped hole because it's actually meant to drill all the way through. A Forstner bit is designed to not go all the way through. and give you a flat bottom. So that's what you want, is a Forstner bit. So once you have that all set up, then you're going to put your cabinet door in place, and you're going to drill down. Now you want to drill a 1/2 inch into it, and I've measured this bit and it's a 1/2 inch. So I can use this as a guide. When the top of my bit is level with the top of the door, the top of the wood that I'm drilling into, then I know I'm deep enough. You don't want to go too deep, because the second you go too deep, you break through the other side, the front of your cabinet, and you don't want a hole in the front of your cabinet. So be very careful not to go too deep. Now the best thing to do is just, once you drill the hole, take your hinge and put it in the hole and just make sure it's going to sit flat. So you want there's a flange on your hinge here, and you want to make sure that's flat against your wood, and that lets you know your hole's deep enough. If it's not deep enough, then you can drill a little bit more. Now, as I say in all my how-to videos, you get to learn from my mistakes. So although a lot of these things I've done numerous times, you don't do them frequently enough. I'm not a cabinet maker, so I don't make cabinets every day of the week. It may be years and years and years between making cabinets, so I sometimes forget little nuances. So here's one of those nuances. When you're building your cabinet door, you need to know what kind of hinges you're going to use first. And part of that reason is, when I told you about routing the groove out to put this panel in, I told you that I was centering mine on the trim piece, which is 3/4 inch. It's a 1x2, so it's 3/4 inch. And so I centered the 1/4 inch slot on my 1x2. Wrong answer, okay? What you want to do is offset it, put your panel closer to the front, and here's why. Well, you can see why. I didn't realize I was showing you that one. See that hole right there? Right there. When I was drilling through for the hinge, although it was fine on my trim panel, the depth, and I'd calculated all that to make sure I wouldn't punch through, it was fine for the depth of the 1x2, but it just cut through the very last veneer of the 1/4 inch plywood. So had we put that 1/8 of an inch more forward, we did not cut through the plywood. So if you want to just have a bare shaker panel like this is right now, that's what you want to do, is offset your panel towards the front. Now, if you want trim in here, then you don't have to offset it. In fact, you may want to offset it towards the back, depending on the thickness of your trim. We were given a choice at this point, once I put a hole in it, to rebuild the entire door and offset it more towards the front, or switch to a trim, which was not our original plan, but it's our plan now. So what we've come up with, since it's a nautical theme, is just using this round dowel, which is made out of hardwood, the same color and consistency as our trim board. And that, you see, just beautifully hides that little cut and kind of still keeps with a nautical theme there. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to trim it out. All right, another tip I want to give you is, not all the time, but a lot of the times, but when you route out the groove for this panel to slide into, it's not tight. It's not always tight. And this one's pretty good, but you can still see I can slide it up and down, and it can move around. So you also see there's a gap right here where the panel is going into there. You can see that gap. So what you want to do is put something in it to prevent that panel from sliding around, and also to eliminate the gap. The best way to do that is you get these little bitty tabs. They're actually made for pictures, to keep the glass in place on pictures. Go to a craft store. It's where you're going to find them. They'll come in a package like this, and they're called glazier points. Don't know what that means, but that's what they're called. And so you just get them and you just shove it between the back of the panel and the frame, and you just shove it in there like that. And then you see where I put that point in, you can see there's no gap anymore. And the panel, well, it still slides a little bit because I only put one in, but you put those all the way around and it'll keep your panel from sliding, and it'll keep it forced against the front so you have no gaps in your paneling. Next, you want to sand the face of your cabinet door down to make it smooth. Probably want to sand a little on the back as well, since when they open the door there'll be access to the back, but it doesn't have to be as smooth as the front. The main thing you're wanting back there is to make sure there's no splinters on it. So get you some fine grit. I use 220, and just do a light sanding. We're not trying to take a lot off, just to lightly sand it down. You probably do not want to sand your panel. It's only a 1/4 inch veneered plywood. The veneer is maybe a 32nd of an inch. You put a sander, electric sander particularly, on there, and it's history. Your veneer's gone in 2 seconds flat, and now you're looking at just regular old plywood. So you probably don't want to sand that down. If there is any roughness on there or a splinter or something you want to get rid of, do it by hand and do just enough to get rid of what you're trying to get rid of. Otherwise, you'll break through that veneer. Once you're done sanding the front and a little bit on the back, and the main things you want to look at aside from smoothness is where your joints meet. You want to make sure that's a smooth transition from one to the other. If there's any ridge there, the light will hit that ridge and make it stand out all the way across the room. So make sure that's a smooth transition anywhere that there's joints. Okay, now also on the corners, you want to make sure that they're slightly rounded, not a lot, just enough to soften that edge. And the same thing on any of your edges. You want to at least slightly round them. You can round them a little bit more if that's the look you want, but at least slightly round them to soften that edge. It looks better, and if somebody runs their hand on it, whether on purpose or accidentally, it's not going to be a sharp edge that will cut into them. It'll feel like just some nice wood. That's what you want. Okay, once you're done with that, the last thing to do is this inside edge, which you didn't want to run your electric sander on this inside edge because you'd hit your panel with your sander. And as I said before, it's a very thin veneer. You don't want to hit that with your sander. So we're going to do this by hand. Just take your 220 grit sandpaper, if that's what you're using, and just get a little piece. And you don't have to sand it real rough. You're just trying to soften that edge. That's all it takes. Next, you want to stain the cabinet door. I recommend, just for aesthetic purposes, to go ahead and stain the inside trim. You don't have to stain the whole door inside, but at least the trim, and that way when the door opens, it'll just make it look that much better. You can stain the whole panel if you want to, but at least do the trim. So that's what I'm doing now. Then I'll flip it over and we'll stain the front. I always like to put my clear coat on after everything's in place. Can be counterintuitive, I guess, but the reason I do that is I want it to be vertical, because I find out I put less clear coat on that way than if it was laying horizontal. I tend to put it thicker if it's laying horizontal, and then that causes issues. You don't want to put clear coat on too thick. So do what's best for you. but I like to go ahead and get everything in place, and then I can spread my clear coat on and it goes on nice and thin. And there you have it. Your door is done. All you have to do is mount the hardware of your choice, mount the door to the cabinet, and you've got a beautiful looking cabinet door to complement your galley.
Visit Amazing Mile Marker Stops.